First take Jenny's question, then we'll do that, and then we'll do the after tea, we'll go back to the text, so we finish off actually doing a bit more reading together. But I don't want these stories to fall off, because in some ways, for us, this is the insight that many of us who either think about as art historians or as artists or curators, it is this question of how you actually do these things, what they are, how they come to be. And Brenda's question of what was bringing in, how does the visitor find the history, etc. So these stories are absolutely gold dust to us in terms of trying to understand what is critical, curatorial practices that may be one of the thematics of this. So,
yes, what I wanted to ask was, when the Planck Institute chopped the two into two halves, the meteorite, and then the meteorite comes back together again, were the Planck Institute involved? Were they interested to see what was going on?
They were not involved.
Right.
And I don't know if they were even aware of it.
Right, because when you were talking about when subatomic particles come close to each other and say hi and then go off to different sides. And I was wondering,
that's so interesting,
about what goes on in that force field between these two meteorites, and had anybody had they looked at the thoughts
that's
of
so
that?
Interesting. We didn't do any research or measurement or anything of that sort. You mean if there were elements that were entangled in the atoms of one half and in the atoms of the other, or even smaller, then what would have happened when they were brought together from a scientific perspective? I don't think anything was done. That's a big loss. That's a big loss.
And
something should have been done to study that situation.
I was wondering. And the second thing was, it seemed to be rather a peculiar explanation that the two pieces couldn't be closer together. I could see them being slightly apart aesthetically.
No,
but
it
to say that it was the weight, it sounded it was the weight.
It was only the question of the distribution of the weight, because if it was close together, more than 60 centimeters or whatever, it was told by the building engineers, it couldn't have happened.
Yes,
so the building engineers asked for a minimum distance to distribute the weight, and that was the distance used by the artists.
So if the building had been bigger, stronger,
they
could have been closer together. It wasn't some Thank you.
But as often happens in artworks, sometimes a physical impediment or a physical limit actually ends up being the cause of a result that the artist likes more.
Yes.
So after the fact, it appeared to Nicolas and Guillermo that had they actually thought of this, it would have been the best idea, because they were together but somehow separate in the sense that you could see also the different treatment of the surface, the polished one versus the rusted one. It really made tangible a universe of different values and attributions of care or not care to objects and things. The obsession with hygiene and no touching of the Smithsonian, in a way that would polish it and keep it in a way that makes no sense in terms of how the outside of it would have been in the earth anyway. And the other situation of an idea that this is, well, they both have this sense that they're autonomous objects at this point, because they're both treating the inside and the outside of the surface in the same way. One open to the weather and the elements, and the other in the museum space. So it just made it, when you were there, you can't see it in the picture, but when you're there physically, the distance between the two halves and the different surface that they had, and knowing that they were actually originally one piece of a meteor that fell, that was produced a billion years ago or whenever, and then fell to the earth thousands of years ago. It was very moving to see this different destiny or history embodied in these materials and there. So I think the artists were very happy with it, the fact that they had been obliged to keep them separate.
I like the look of it when it was like that, so thank you very much.
Can I just ask about you said there was a force field.
Yes.
Was that noticeable in experience? Did it affect
Yes.
things? What happened?
A certain number of... I didn't notice it in the small taco in the Frankfurt exhibition, but the Chaco, which is 37 tons, in the Chaco region where I went to see it, I noticed it very well, which is a kind of, it's visualized by all these small gnats and bugs and things that hover around it. That's all that you could say is objective. But subjective, of course, whether it's my projection or not, you feel grounded. And I think that has something to do with the iron in your body and the iron of the density of the iron that it has. And so it seems to have a healing effect that the indigenous peoples have written about and spoken about for centuries, you know, that it's some sort of magnetism that...
Did it affect electronic things like phones and stuff?
I didn't notice that.
Pacemakers or...
I was with no one with a pacemaker. So... But this question of that you were raising, or the question that you were discussing before we arrived, I wonder if we've really gone anywhere with that. I mean, was your feeling, your feeling is around this piece that it was a good thing that it hadn't been moved, or was it related to some thinking about other relations with such stories and...
I think I was just interested in the activation of the displacement and how it was the proposal and how it could work, and I was thinking of things to do with Smithson's site, non-site, and it seemed like it wasn't a dialectical kind of displacement between site and non-site, and if it had moved, one of your questions was, just paraphrasing, was would it prefer to be in an art exhibition than a science museum? So my idea was that if it had been moved, it would be moving into the category of art momentarily. Mm-hmm. And that was quite interesting, which is why I was wondering what it would be to then bring an artwork back to the site that it had left, because that would be part of the process, perhaps, that it had moved as an object into the art world. What would it be for an art object to be shifted to that site?
But remaining as an art object?
Well, I don't know. When it got there, the art object would be displaced, so what would it then be in that site? In the site of El Chaco.
That's very interesting. This may have nothing to do with it, but it makes me think of the work of a young Serbian artist called Irene Knizević, a proposal which hasn't yet occurred, where she proposes to use art as shields for protecting from war, in the sense of she would like to put in cement in war zones artworks and tell the world, so that there's like a human shield, kind of a cultural shield, because there tends to be this, well, there are rules, you know, there are rules the United Nations has to, you're not allowed to bomb places that of this sort and that sort and that sort, and one of the categories has to do with the protection of cultural heritage. It becomes a crime against humanity to bomb intentionally an artwork that is part of humanity's cultural heritage. So her project involves this displacing of these artworks that have to be very, very valuable and recognized as into war zones. And she has convinced a collector who has Van Gogh or something to put it under cement in some place that's like border of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Yes, and I think he has agreed, and they're now at this point where they're at this.
Van Gogh in the world would be great.
Yeah, I think it's a Van Gogh. Yes.
That would be a tragedy.
We would have to ask her. But she's a very interesting young Serbian artist. Her name is Irene Knižević. She also, I mean, in terms of Knižević, I think that's her. She was trained as a mathematician, actually. And one of her works that is known is this one, with the shoes. You see this shoe?
Oh, yeah, like Yugoslav shoes.
You know this shoe?
They were made during the Yugoslav period.
Yes.
Everybody wore them.
Yes. These are workers' shoes. I have these shoes, actually, but I didn't bring them with me. But these factories that make, this is a previous work, so it's not the work that she's now working on. But it has to do, I guess, with precarious labor and how we define the workspace from the play space, I mean, the leisure from the work. And I'm only telling you this because it's the same artist, just to give you some background to this question of the artwork as a human shield, as an artistic shield. Anyway, in the Yugoslav period, there were factories in every big city that made these shoes. These shoes were made by a very ergonomic, like with doctors and things, orthopedics people, very, very well designed to not hurt your feet and be the perfect thing to be standing up in for a long time. Plus, they also had this aesthetic quality, because the government thought that there should be designers working, so they got like the best designers of clothes in Yugoslavia to work on this with the ergonomic. Came out this shoe that was to be used in the winter and in the summer. You put socks in the winter, but it's only in the workspace. When you arrive, you put them on. So her project, which is currently underway, and I'm actually not fulfilling it because I'm somebody who has a pair of these shoes, they cost less than $3 to make. She's found one factory in ex-Yugoslavia that still has the machines, and even though a lot of people have lost their jobs, she's remaking the jobs by reactivating the factory and working basically for her, making these shoes at $3. So they've been able to hire people again that were working there and have been laid off in the last 10 years. And the shoes are basically your work shoes. So whenever we are working, we're supposed to put them on. And when we're not working, we take them off. So it basically makes you think about whether you're, I mean, what am I doing now? Am I in a gray area? Is this pleasure and work? Or is this only work? Or is this not? So it helps you to ground yourself and redefine those boundaries that have been broken with capitalism in its latest era of indistinguishability between work. So when Joseph Beuys does the suitcase, Ich kenne kein Weekend, I know no weekend, she does the shoes to remake the boundary. We can all have them if you want. We just have to tell her it's $3 and then you have to pay for the shipping and that's it.
I just wanted to, it reminded me of something that I was reminded of, the watermelon image as an image of slavery.
That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm. That I've only reminded of it because I was listening to something about Gone with the Wind.
Huh. Okay, here's the project that I was just talking to you, Annex, 2012. Annex facilitates strategic placements of art objects through an international network of activist collectors who temporarily or permanently donate Western masterpieces to institutions lacking national and international protection. The project gives works of art a direct stake in political conflicts by creating architectural safe zones Due to the delicate nature of the work, the amount of public information is limited. Details of this project, its stages, research and deployment are available upon request, so there's no picture. But it's actually because she's doing the first cementification of a Western masterpiece now, you know, because she's only just recently convinced somebody. So, but that's the work that came to my mind in terms of artworks as they're in their materiality, art objects and their social negotiations and their physical negotiations. And it's the only other work that comes to my mind that has to do with what happens if you take an artwork and put it somewhere, a conventionally accepted artwork, and put it somewhere.
This is a perfect segue to the work about the Buddhas and books.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So we'll leave the essay you're reading for a little bit, and we'll go back to the brain, actually. The brain. If you don't mind, I'll keep it like this as a visualization so we know where things are, I mean, what's coming up next. So I mentioned to you, I'd like to speak to you about some of the connections and linkages that were inward bound and some of them that were distractions, distrahere, outward bound in the in and outs of this brain. And I'd like to get to the work of Mike Rakovits at some point, somehow, and Mario Garcia Torres. Okay, but how we get there is going to take a few minutes to somehow get into it, but let's just try to get there somehow. Because a story needs a good beginning, you know? You can't just do a story like that. It has to somehow connect. So we said that in the brain, when you enter into it, well, the first thing, before I get to the story, just the pre-story. So the pre-story is this glass, and as you can see on the glass, from the glass, it's 4 parts that had to be 4 parts because there isn't a piece of crystal or glass that can be bigger than that. So you had these vertical lines, but the vertical lines also gave you the more clarity that there was a panel of glass. And through that, you saw the Morandi paintings in front of you, kind of classically hanging, and a certain number of vitrines and the 2 stones. The 2 stones are by Giuseppe Pennone, and they are called river stone, pietra di fiume. And one of them is actually the river stone, and the other is a copy of the river stone made by the artist as a sculptor, sculpting it as closely as possible to that stone made by the river. So he was, in a sense, you could say that it has a relation with Via Sailman's work that did something similar on a small scale. That you may know that work, but the motivations and the effect that you had from this work are quite different. It's a 1977 piece. I don't know when Via Sailman's piece was, but I asked Pennone and he was not aware of that work, nor do I think Via Sailman's was aware. But I think they're completely different. And what is it? What he's trying to put into comparison is indeed a play on the idea that art is somehow a window onto the world, and art is also a representation of the world, which indeed it is, because he's copying one stone with the digging into the other, sculpting into the other. But it's also not that, it's also about the comparison between 2 modes of art making or form making, and to make one think about the differences and analogies between that form making and art making. One being the agency made by the agency of the hand of the artist, and the other the agency of the water. And is it possible to actually consider that the stone made by the river is also an artwork in a broader vision of form and creativity, as being made of this forms of engaging with matter and forms of touching. So that is also part of it. But the glass, as I mentioned to you before, was very much there also because similarly I wanted to foreground the two visitors. So in this it has a reference to Dan Graham, actually quite explicitly, to the piece by Dan Graham where there's two rooms, and one room, two doors, and there's a glass between the two rooms. And in one room there's a mirror on one end, and in the other room there's a wall on one end. And as a visitor you can go into one half, one little room, or you can go into the other room and have a different experience of being both being looked at by others, while at the same time being the looking person, the looking agent at the others through the glass. And the two rooms are distinguished by one, you are in a feeling of vulnerability because your back is also seen by those who are in the half of the room that doesn't have the mirror behind them. They can see your front and they can see your back, while you can only see their front. So there is a sense of there's the expression, avere le spalle coperte, to have your shoulders covered. You stand with the wall behind you because you are more protected. So in the half where there's the mirror, the viewers feel more vulnerable than in the other half. So there's this kind of setup about the merging and blurring of the viewer and the viewed, and at the same time the different conditions of vulnerability within which the gaze can be acting or enacted in his piece. And in this piece, in this piece is not a piece, but it's a partition which separated off the brain, but it was referencing that insofar as I wanted the viewers of the dOCUMENTA to also have a sense that they were also viewing themselves, and what is it to become an object of being viewed. So in some ways, this is the key to the fact that the whole dOCUMENTA was a bit of a meta exhibition. And in this meta exhibition, in this exhibition of possible models of exhibitions, there were all the possible ways there was the historical staging of an exhibition, there was the public art exhibition outside, there was the school as art exhibition. So many of the models that we know that have developed throughout the last 30 or 40 years of what is an exhibition were emplaced in the dOCUMENTA as formats. So it was also a multiplicity of formats. And this was a key to that insofar as you were clearly watching an exhibition unfold as you were outside. And in fact, it was extremely crowded always of people, and many people would stay outside of this glass and watch the people watch the exhibition. That has to do with the reason why there was this key to that, which was the picture. That's a problem, no problem. The key to that was that picture, this, and the Gonzales. So by bringing in, this was just outside of the brain to the right. So by bringing in the Gonzales objects that Gonzales had shown in the dOCUMENTA of 1955 and 1959, next to the photograph of the viewers from the 1959 exhibition watching it, this was somehow key to this intent of a sort of mise en abîme of exhibition space itself, and theatricalization, you could say, of the exhibition space itself. So, so this here, which is separate, with using the photograph as a caption for the artworks that are, however, under glass, whereas in this they are not under glass. This situation of caption and glass, and then this situation was very much behind this situation, in the creation of this situation. And I don't have a picture here of visitors inside, but that was one of the motivations. The second thing that is important to say about this glass is that you cannot read here anything really well at all. But on the other side of the glass, from the inside, when you look at the two stones, by the way, which of the two stones do you think is the one that the river made, and which is the one that Benone made? Do you think? Can't really. Huh?
my knee jerk is that it's the one for the further away one. Like
This one?
the one on the left.
This one is the one he made?
The river.
The river, and this one he made. I can't remember. I'm going to have to look this up. I really can't remember. I don't know. But that's interesting. It may well be. May well be. I can't remember. But what you saw from here was both visitors outside waiting in line to enter into the brain, because there were two doors behind this white wall and then behind the other white wall that you could enter in. Actually, there was one that you could enter into when there was a lot of people, and then you would exit from the other one. But you would read these texts, you see, the middle of the middle of the middle of, which was the Lawrence Weiner intervention into the dOCUMENTA. Now, if you think about it, no problem. I mean, Lawrence Weiner came up with this after listening to me speaking about the dOCUMENTA and speaking about the no concept and speaking about the many exhibitions and speaking about emplacement and displacement and speaking about Kabul and Banff and Cairo. And he at first was very troubled and didn't know what to do. And then finally he decided that he was going to write in the middle of, first it was in the middle of the middle of the middle, but then it became the middle of the middle of the middle of, and that this should, he asked me where the middle was so that he would know where to put it. And I asked Anton Zellinger where the middle was, and Anton said, but the middle is everywhere, because everything is a middle, you know, everything is the middle of infinity. I mean, it depends. So everywhere is the middle and nowhere is the middle. Here is the middle, said Anton. So from the point of view of that, which is that there is no middle, and this of course is referencing the idea of Eurocentricism and the centrality of the dOCUMENTA exhibition and its relations to the world at large and the cultural spheres of the world at large. Once I really felt that the middle was everywhere, depending on where the self was in deciding when the middle was, it was fine to use a very arbitrary middle, which was the brain, and to use actually the center of this hemisphere, because the brain was not a circle, it was in a hemisphere. And this is very important because it's the hemisphere, just like the stone that was cut in two. It's only half of truth, it's a half-truth. And every truth is a bit of a half-truth, isn't it? And that's why the tapestry upstairs, only half of it was in the exhibition in Kassel and half was in the exhibition in Kabul, the Goshka Machuga one. So in this half-truth, which is this partiality, you know, how we can stay in the sphere of partialities always. That's a kind of objectives. Can one stay in the space of potentiality, and can one hover in the space of partiality? And in this partiality, of course, which is symbolized by this hemisphere within which the brain was, which is traditionally a kind of main point of the dOCUMENTA, we wrote in the middle of the middle. But the important decision on the part of Lawrence, which took many months of his thinking, and it's all traced in the logbook, if you want to read the part of the logbook that tells the story of, one day he sent me an email and said, I got it. You know, I figured out how to do this, because he didn't know how to write it in the brain or where to write it in the brain. Once I had said, write it in the brain. And he said, but you're supposed to decide where to write it in the brain, because my work says that the work can be made as his premises of the statements for conceptual, his conceptual sentences. What are they called? The statements, the three things. The work can be made, the work doesn't need to be made, and so on, that describe the fact that the work is not the words. The work is never the words for Lawrence Weiner. The work is, you actually put the wood in the space and have it float, or you write the words as a non-work, as a caption for the possible work that you make or not. It's not that he's making art out of words. I mean, he's a materialist. Well, Weiner is a materialist, not Kossuth, but certainly Weiner is. So most people don't make the work. They just write the caption for the work, and then they decide that the viewer can imagine the work, and they leave it at this state of pure potentiality. But, and I decided to do that too. So the middle of the middle was going to be written, and he more or less said, I have to decide where it's written, because it's the artist doesn't have to do that. And so, but I didn't know, and he decided on the glass. And one day he wrote an email saying, I got it. And the point was to not write it from here, that you could read it left to right here, but it had to be written from the inside out. So on the if you were outside nearby, you could see it reversed. It was reversed text. But since he put it from the inside, it was coming somehow from the inside of the brain outwards. So the language was not a label put onto something, but the language was a line of flight, was a string coming from the mind into the world. So that was when the piece somehow became the winner. It was a successful piece for him and for me as well. And it marks the fact that, for the viewers, it marks the fact that you have to go in the brain, that there is no looking at the brain from the outside. There is no external observer. There is no external position in not only in the artist's work, but in the viewer's work as well, which is a kind of a classical structuralist way of looking at any art as being made by the receiver as much as by the sender and the whatever the material is that's being sent and so on. So inside the brain, as I mentioned to you previously, there were a number of things, and included in these things was this vitrine with the Bactrian princesses. And that was one of the two references to the Afghan question or venue, direct references. Although there were many references to moments of trauma and moments of war, for example, the reference to Hitler in the objects that belong to Hitler, and also in the Hochheisel, that has to do with where one is. One is in Kassel, one is in this place where this occurred. But there was Lebanon and the civil wars of Lebanon, and there was the Vietnam War, and there was the the American War. In Vietnam, they call it the American War. So in Vietnam, they call it the American War because, of course, it's a question of perspective and that bomb pond. So there were these other references, and then there was the reference. It's okay. I have this now. It's okay. And then there was the reference to the current events, which was the civil uprising and war. Let's call it war, but the civil uprising in Egypt. And on this, you saw the YouTube video that Ahmed Bazioni had uploaded 2 days before dying in Tahrir Square, which I mentioned to you, I think, in the lecture. So all of these different historical moments and places were interacting. They were interacting, actually, not intra-acting. What was interacting was these objects that referred to those events that somehow became and generated a world. But they themselves, the historical events, were interacting in this collapse of time and historical events. And the reference to Afghanistan came through the Bactrian princesses, which I mentioned to you, and which we discussed in relation both to the scale of the objects being similar to the viewer's feeling of the scale of handheld devices today, because they are clearly made with kind of large pebbles or large stones, which you would naturally relate to the Pennone rocks and to the other stones outside, larger or smaller. But they were mostly, they gave you the feeling of the handheld. They were 20 centimeters approximately. So the relation with our containers of knowledge or diffractors of knowledge, which are those handheld devices, and the relationship with where they came, which is Central Asia, and the conflicts in Central Asia, were the first reference, let's say, to this existence of an Afghan dOCUMENTA 13. If you look carefully at one of the labels of these, in particular the label of this one, which wasn't a particularly beautiful one, but you read that it belonged to Giuseppe Pennone, collection Giuseppe Pennone. And in fact, it was in the collection of Giuseppe Pennone. And in fact, it is Giuseppe Pennone. In my talking about wanting to do part of the dOCUMENTA in Afghanistan and talking about the Bamiyan Buddhas with him, in the years prior to the dOCUMENTA, because the first time I went to Afghanistan for dOCUMENTA was 2009. I gave a lecture in the, it wasn't at Baghe Babur, it was in a beautiful, beautiful building in the center of town that was restored by the Aga Khan Foundation. And it was originally a mosque, and now it's used for lectures and talks, sometimes by the university or sometimes by the Aga Khan Foundation. And it's right in the middle of this kind of devastated city, and very beautiful space. And so the first thing that happened there was a lecture about dOCUMENTA and its history in October 2009. The same day that, in the same occasion, Mario Garcia Torres gave a lecture about his interest in Alighiero Boetti to explain why he wanted to be why he was in Kabul that day. And in telling the story to Pennone about this trip to Afghanistan and the question of the relationship between art and destruction in war situations or post-war situations, the relationship between that and the destruction of the Fridericianum, but also the violation of modern art through the edicts of the day after the Entartete Kunst exhibition, which was an exhibition widely visited in Germany in 36, I think, that went to many, many cities in Germany. And it was an exhibition of expressionist artists who were then banned from visibility by the Nazis. And artists like Kirchner and Kandinsky and other artists were in this Entartete Kunst exhibition. I'm not sure about Kandinsky. Was Kandinsky in Entartete Kunst? Kandinsky, yes, of course. And then the day after, they were no longer allowed to be exhibited, but also not allowed to paint. And there are these stories of Kirchner not painting any oil paintings in certain years, but you find watercolors because of the fear of the smell of the oil paint in the house during those days. So we were talking about this also paradox of the digital age, where it seemed to me that there had been an increase in the destruction of artworks compared to the previous modern eras, up until, if we go far back, up until the French Revolution. There seemed to me that there's a lot of destruction of architecture, but very little destruction of sculpture and painting, whereas there had been looting of sculpture and painting, and there had been putting it away into a sphere of invisibility. And we would mention the fact that the Nazis didn't actually destroy the Entartete Kunst, but put it away in vaults and so on. And we would talk about, Pennone and I would talk about this question of the fact that this was probably due to the secularization of art, and therefore the commodification of art. So if art has an ideological and political and religious power in the society in which it is emerging or embedded, it can be seditious, and therefore you must destroy it. So you destroy the gods of the others, and you destroy the art of the others. You destroy the paintings of the kings of the others, and so on. But if art is not that, and it is an object of commerce, and it has no longer that cultic and ideological function, there's no reason to destroy it. You just take it and sell it, or yes, hang on to it for the future to sell. And therefore, it seemed to me that after the French Revolution was the last time that there was a lot of destruction of individual art objects, that had decreased throughout even the colonial period, even in the whole, there was depredation of artifacts from different cultures, but not destruction of them as much. In the 1500s, there was the melting of the gold of the Incas and so on, but we're talking 1800s, and it's different. So in talking about this and then thinking, but the Buddhas were blown up. Then I started to think about how in the digital age and in the age of communications, of rapid communications, globalized age, suddenly there's a vulnerability of the art objects again. And I think, this is my idea, it is caused by the fact that, but this was going to be part of the lecture called The Witness, the third Leverhulme lecture. So I think we better just skim over it and then come back to it in Leverhulme lecture. But it has something to do with the symbolic and the switching of real and symbolic, and therefore the space, this kind of interspace between the two halves, or this space of art, is both somehow material and somehow of the image. And so it's of the symbolic order, and it's somehow of some other order of affairs. And therefore, in that troubled space in which it lies, if it then is communicated on the internet, it has more effect than in creating fear or in establishing power systems than the destruction of human bodies. So you can have like hundreds of people dying, and it doesn't have the same effect as if you put on the internet the blowing up. I mean, it's not the people in the Twin Towers, it's the image of the towers. And it's not the people around the Buddhas, it's the Buddhas that are the ones that create this pain of the destruction. So it's the body of the symbolic, and somehow the body of the symbolic is the embodied artwork. And so in this switching of the orders with the Society of Communications, it suddenly takes on again a kind of power that it had, similar to the cultic and ideological political power that it had prior to the rise of modernity, I think. So we can go into that more in detail in the third lecture, but it was certainly one of the themes of this brain. And in talking about that to Pennone told me, do you know the Bactrian princesses? And I said, well, no, I've never heard of them. And he said, well, there are very few, and I have one. And I said, well, what? What are they? And then I started to research it, and he, being an artist who likes stone, I mean, he also collects things. He exchanges works with other artists, and he used money from his own sales to buy a Bactrian princess, which was not that expensive at that time, but it certainly is a big commitment by an artist in any case to buy something like that. It was at the time about 60,000 euros, which is nothing for what they are, for that little one, or the kind of ugly one. But 60 or 70, I think. I don't really know. I mean, that should be edited out, actually. I have no idea what exactly he paid, but it's just was my conjecture, and I spoke without knowing right now. And the storytelling needed a bit of number, so I just attached it. But in any case, he told me, they come from the north of Afghanistan, and it's a really interesting thing because they're unique to the whole world. I don't know of any other composite stone sculptures that are not either incastro, when the stone is put in and can't move, or glued together. So there's no there's no incastro, there's no glue, they are just provisionally held together, these parts. And he said to me, these parts that are provisionally held together seem to me to be what you're trying to do with this question of the metaphor of the blown up Bamyan Buddhas and how they can be somehow held provisionally together in an exhibition, and these shards or fragments. And because what I'm fascinated by is that in thousands of years, that top part was not lost. And I verified this myself directly when visiting a collection that had many of these, to see, with gloves and so on, if you could put the head of one on the body of another and so on, and it can't do it.
Are they balanced or are they pegged?
There's no peg.
They just sit.
They just sit. They just rest. That's the whole point. They just sit and they just rest. But I tried to take one hairdress and put it on the head of another, and it didn't just sit. In the 10 that I had in front of me, there was no possibility, not even once, that the little arm could rest on another lap.
So they were made out of the same stone?
No, they were made at the same time. Two different stone. The white is limestone, and the other is steatite, calcite, so it's a little bit green or gray. But whoever made them in the same moment, and so that it rests perfectly. And because they're all unique, you never see one that's similar to the other, except in the broadest general terms. If they had been made in a very standardized way, you could put the arm of one on another, so you could say, well, over thousands of years, these are not the real sculpture. They're recomposed by parts that have been found of one sculpture, another sculpture, another sculpture. That's not possible. From my experience of touching and holding them and putting them together, it's not possible, because the way that the arm will rest on this one has a little arm. You cannot rest it on this one, nowhere, or on this one. It doesn't fit right, you know. So it's like a puzzle. When you make a puzzle, it's just sometimes it almost fits if you push, but it's not right. And then when it's the right piece, the puzzle just fits. So this, he seemed to think, was somehow connected to what I was trying to do with the fragments of the Bamyan Buddhas, and maybe with the various places and locations that would somehow fit into something together. So this was the first relation to Afghanistan, which I told to Mike Rakovitz, and you will see what he did with this question of carved stone and the stones. But they are not from the Bamyan region. The second relationship was this, which I told you about, which is the Youssef Assefi, very, very modest landscape painting by Youssef Assefi. I mean, if you see it in the real, it's not special at all. You know, it's nice because by chance it's of the Silk Route, and so it's from the region, and it's not far from where Bamyan is, the Bamyan Valley. So that was the reason why I chose this, because it's another hint in a way to the landscape around the Bamyan Valley and the Silk Routes in Afghanistan. But, and these are not Buddhas here, but these are pieces of this kind of very soft rock that is making up all those cliffs. And it made it the perfect place for the Buddhists to make their Buddhas there for centuries and centuries, until the country became Islamic, which I believe is very late. It's sometime around the 800s after Christ. So there's a whole Buddhist period previous to that. They were no longer made then, because, I mean, they were made, but not as much, because there was not particularly Buddhists, that many Buddhist people. And the Tasiruddin was just postcards of Kassel painted over, so they had nothing to do directly with Afghanistan. Upstairs was this tapestry made in Belgium, made out of a composition of, let's see if I can go from current slide. It's made up of composing, digitally putting together a number of photographs that she took when we were in Kabul. And these are students of the Fine Arts Department and professors of the art school in Afghanistan. Mixed in with them are figures that have to do with the politics going on there. There's also representatives of the occupying forces that are kind of hidden into this situation. And in front are edited in figures that she took as photographs in different moments of daily life in the streets in Kabul. And in the background is the Darul Aman Palace, which was built as a parliament for Afghanistan in the 1920s by a German architect, actually. And it is an area of contention now for the international occupying forces and neighboring allies to help rebuild the country. Everybody wants the visibility of taking care of the Darul Aman. I think the Indian government has achieved the possibility of restoring it, and it will become something of another government office. But in the meantime, it also is a place where you don't really want to be, because there are sometimes shellings, snipers who shoot from these hills over here. So it's considered a dangerous place to walk around if you walk around too much in this building. And it is, however, what you see when you look out from the windows of the Archaeological Museum of Kabul, in which you see a lot of fragments of destroyed Buddhas that are smaller, that were destroyed during the Taliban period, and some of which have been reconstructed by the conservators in the gallery, in the Archaeological Museum. When you look close up at this tapestry, which I can't really do, you see the thread. So it's very much like it's a very, very highly contrasted black and white photograph that's made up of these many, many threads that are woven together. But, oh, this is the picture I was looking for yesterday. This is Anton Zellinger's lab in Vienna. It looks like a quack scenography for a film about quantum physics. This is where he's freezing Adam to see if he can entangle big things. And I just think it's so funny to see these wires and objects. This was his thing inside the dOCUMENTA, which I can explain to you at another moment. I think I will stop a minute on, before we get there, I will stop a minute, take a sidetrack onto Testadin. So in Kassel, Testadin, aside from those two little postcards, had this space which was previously a vault of a bank. And because it was in the basement of a building, even though Kassel had been destroyed, the vault basement area was in perfect shape. So we rented it and used it. And the actual money big vault was down this second flight of stairs. But on this ground floor of this very bank-looking bank, she put blackboards and put blackboard material, and with white chalk, like the chalk of a school, she drew images of the Hindu Kush, and in particular of the melting of the snow, which goes from the Hindu Kush down, gives the water to the valley where Kabul is, and also floods the city. There's like 1 or 2 days a year when the water goes above the banks and it kind of floods the city. And in her first proposition for her artwork to show in Kassel, she wanted to make her first blind film. And what that meant was that she would not go to Afghanistan because she felt that there was an ethical problem with this artist's gaze in Afghanistan filming something. And she wanted to be very delicate, and that there would be somehow no touching. No touching. But she wanted to also delve deeply into the contradictions of Orientalism within also her own background. I mean, she had read the book of The Way to, there's a famous travel book, British travel book of going to Afghanistan. It's the road to Aswan or something, the road to, I will look it up. But so she decided that she would work together with one of those camera people from Afghan film that I reminded you of, being out of work and kind of not doing anything because film is obsolete, and that she would send over in this really high-tech Kabul that we have today with all the video of CNN and Al Jazeera and everybody's there. So she, through our networking there, through one of the Afghan artists, Man Mojadidi and so on, we connected with Afghan film. As I told you, Mariam Ghani did that other project, but this is not the story of Mariam Ghani. And we hired a filmmaker, not a filmmaker, a camera person that would be the eyes for Tacita. And it would be no sound recording, and she would put the sound in Berlin, back in Berlin. So there was this kind of either no sound or no eyes, but a kind of divided sensoriality, broken sensoriality. And she sent a camera and sent the film stock and all of that. It was a 16 mil. But the footage that she got has a mistake in it, which is that there is a small technical device, part of the apparatus of the camera, that ended up being filmed by the camera itself by mistake. And therefore, she said that she could not use this footage. I thought she could use the footage because it was very interesting that this was a reference to the camera itself being in the footage. But she decided that it was not possible, that it was failed footage. It was not only a blind film, but failed footage. I think the reality is probably lies somewhere in between, which is that she's filmed everything that she's done, and so she felt that she couldn't really use this film at the time. And what she had asked to be filmed in Afghanistan was this flooding of the film, of the river. That was one of the images. And also that one of the only instructions was to go to places where women weren't allowed to be. So the way that she would not have been allowed to be even if she had had her camera in Kabul. So it made sense. And so he filmed a certain number of things and places where women were not allowed to be and sent her this. And she didn't use it. But what she did do then was this return to her earliest work that she had left for, I don't know, 14, 15 years. Her earliest work were these chalk drawings, which were a little bit like sets for films or storyboards for films in a way. So the piece that she made, therefore, was a series of these chalk drawings of these mountains with snow and of the melting snow caps in the most fragile way in locations where the viewers would walk, but the drawings would be very vulnerable. Indeed, there were narrow passages, and if you go too close, you would erase the drawing a little bit. And I remember there was a big discussion with her gallery about fixing it with spray before the dOCUMENTA opened, but she didn't want that. And not only because the quality of the chalk would be slightly flatter than if it had been without protection, but also I think it had something to do with the vulnerability of this drawing and the fragility, the same fragility of film that is dying and dead, and the vulnerability of this drawing. So these were references to Afghanistan in Kassel, and you could say that they were somewhat of an Orientalism because they came from looking at pictures in tourist and travel books about Afghanistan. Most of those travel books are books that date back to the 70s and 60s, when there was quite a bit of tourism. It was not only on the Silk route and so on, but it was the so-called hippie route. All hippies went to India via Afghanistan, stopped and smoked a lot. And it was this thing, and that's where the Afghan coat came back, you know, with the embroidery and the fuzzy thing here, you know. It was like part of the grand tour for a hippie was to go to Afghanistan. And so, hello, welcome back. And so, no problem. So there's this kind of gap in our minds when we look at these tourist books that you can buy on eBay or wherever, because it just doesn't seem right. Like Afghanistan is supposed to be this place that there's, like we're in the middle of the Vietnam War, you know, bombing people and children and horrible things going on, and before that horrible repression, Taliban, da, 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 da. So you don't think of it as, and you can stay in this hotel, and then if you drive to this place, there's this magnificent restaurant, and then you can get petrol for your car in this place, and you can, so these travel logs are very quite disquieting books, but that have these magnificent also photographs of the Hindu Kush region. So what is interesting to me is both the embodying and engaging with the contradictions of Orientalism, because technically speaking, she's somehow doing that in the sense that she's referencing this very distant land, speaking about it as a very beautiful land, a very mysterious land in many ways in which she depicts this, and it's also somehow a land of the past, in this case the past being the 60s and 70s, but normally Orientalism is, it's great, but it finished in the 1500s, as we know from Edward Said's books. It has to be distanced historically, and yet when you actually went through this installation, what happened was that you felt that it was anywhere. It wasn't specifically located because of the nature of mountains and mountainscapes. It could have been the Alps, it could have been Latin America, it could have been Canada, it could have been Arizona, it could have been anywhere. So there was this double movement, on the one hand of a kind of Orientalist the acceptance of the fact that she can do nothing but an Orientalist gesture, and on the other hand, the fact that there is no Orientalist gesture, that this is something somehow that has that neutrality or presumed neutrality of the platform that Kassel itself is, as in being the space of dOCUMENTA, this neutral modernist, modern white cube place. And so the mountains could be here, could be there, could be anywhere. They are nowhere. They are somehow outside of reality, distilled from reality. So these two things were going on, plus Alison, many others.
Plus the fact it was chalk. I was just thinking.
Oh,
about
yes.
that. Yeah, I mean, because that's also another distancing mechanism, because it isn't film, is which what all, illustration is what you would expect it to be in, Orientalist tourism or whatever. So that was another for
Yes.
her. I mean, it's
Yes.
interesting that she couldn't escape Orientalism. That's what is interesting to me, is that in her own practice it brought her back around again.
Yes.
That however she tried to not use the traditional technical means of Orientalism, even by doing the chalk drawing in the end, it still comes back round to it. It's so interesting, all the moves she made to
Yes,
try not
that's
to
very
be
interesting.
Orientalist.
No, but it's also trying to be. I mean,
Okay,
she was
okay.
accepting it. She was buying the tourist books. She was fantasizing not being there, this fantastical world that is somehow perfect but distant
Yeah.
and non-Western. So she was actually taking on that role, but it was almost a performative role that she was also...
But at a distance, because she'd sent somebody else to
Yes, yes.
perform it in a sense, or
Well, that's part of it.
to neutralise,
Yes.
to make it a technical exercise for the person
Yes.
who went. Yeah.
Yes. Mostly she spoke to me about the fact that in the end they could be mountains anywhere, so it
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
cancelled out itself.
Yeah.
But in the potential erasure, it had to do with the erasure of visibility. It had to do with the erasure of film. These are film strips in a way. And in Kabul instead, so this is what the visitors in Kassel would see, except for these two postcards, right, of Kassel. But in Kabul, this is the installation of her work in Kabul. So we built these vitrines, and we exhibited on cloth that she chose, the kind of cloth, the color of cloth and everything, and the design for everything, these postcards. So she did not go. She did not want to go. It was also not wanting to go for very clear, also political reasons. And the postcards in Kabul were also, if in the experience of this woman here, or this child, or this man and his daughter, they were of a place that they did not know. The same way the visitor here was looking at a place they did not know, the Hindu Kush. So in a way, there was a balancing between putting the condition, putting the viewer in Kassel in the same condition as the viewer in Kabul, which is both of a partiality, because of a care in the sense of the specificity of a work for here and a work for there, which was not the choice of some of the artists. Some of the artists the choice was to show the same work in both places. But her choice was to dedicate herself specifically to the context, so to be very context dependent in each of the two places. So to carefully choose the bank, the early 20th century bank. We're talking about the Weimar Republic, for God's sake. We're talking about the banks. They're going around with the wheelbarrows, and the elections in 1933 as a consequence that brought the Nazis to power. And so it's not by chance that it's the vault of a bank under a destroyed building where this is occurring. And this is the reverse situation where the viewers never been to Kassel, most probably everybody except for maybe one or two of the diaspora artists who were back. But most of the population of the 30,000 people who went to the exhibition did not recognize these buildings or these places in Kassel, nor did they know that, well, they did know. There was a wall text that said that the city didn't look like that now because it had been destroyed during a war. So there could be a projective identification with imagining Kabul before the 70s. And it was explained in the wall text that the paint on top of them was to make them look more like it looks now, once the buildings were rebuilt or modernized and things like that. And these are the pictures. So this is one of the castle postcards, and this is as it is now. It's interesting, I don't have the postcard painted. But there is a book now that has come out with König that you can get, or you can order maybe for the library here, which has this postcard painted over with some differences that she noticed here. So for example, in this postcard, she will have painted over this little house with white. And you would see this postcard without this. And it's caused by this picture, which was done during the preparation for the exhibition. This is the outside of the Fridericianum and the supermarket next door, the Rote, which was in the Rote Galerie. On top of this building are the Thomas Schutte ceramics on the roof from a preceding dOCUMENTA. It's the building to the left of the Fridericianum, and here in the background you see the Fridericianum. And this is as it is now. So I don't know what she did here, but she probably did something. Yeah. This is the Orangerie before the war, and taken more or less from the same perspective is this. There's probably the buildings in the background. Yes, you see the buildings in the background. That's the old opera house. It's gone. And this is the small streets behind the Fridericianum. The workers' neighborhoods, the ones that I told you were firebombed, and workers' neighborhoods. And where are we? And this, I don't know. I don't have evidently all of the. These are some of the postcards that she used. Okay, so the story of Tastadin's participation in dOCUMENTA is that. So what we have is the book of the postcards now, the actual paintings that were exhibited in Kabul only, and the chalk drawing after film, the film after film of the Hindu Kush in Castle. So, I mean, to go back to your question, what was your question? My question, yeah, about what was actually the view, what did the visitors see? Well, I would say that the visitors in Castle saw saw the chalk drawings and those two little postcards in the case of Testa. The visitors in Kabul saw the postcards in the gallery space that were painted by Testa. And I would say that this, in general, this attempt to create partialities also for the visitors was intentional on my part, because I don't believe that you can have an experience of an exhibition, a whole experience. I don't believe it. So either because the curator has put in, when they put in too many hours of film and nobody can actually see it, people feel overwhelmed. And there's too much to see, and you have to make these choices, and you feel you're sacrificing something, you're missing this and missing this and missing this. And I think that in our moment, historical moment, we're told on the one hand that we can have everything. We can Wikipedia everything, we can Google everything, we can have anything we want, we can go on eBay and buy it. But on the other hand, what we're really creating is this dysfunctional collectivity of people who are constantly feeling humiliated by not having read that book, by not having seen that film, by not having gone to that dinner party, by not having gone to that exhibition, by not having done this, by not having done that. Because what we actually get with this overflow of information is the information of everything that we're missing. So on the one hand, I wanted to make that very clear. There is no dOCUMENTA. You cannot say, I saw all of dOCUMENTA. But to make it so extreme that it becomes a subject of discussion and a subject that we can talk about, that all experiences, all cultural experiences, all life experiences are partialities. We cannot be one with other people. It's not possible. fully, totally. And so that's one point. And the other point was a question of post-colonial contexts and the art world. And I wanted to redress something which was very problematic in my view, which is the biennalization of the world is very much related to a one-way direction. I mean, there are more and more biennales all over the world, and there are certain people that can travel to them that have enough money, you know, collectors, art gallerists, dealers. But most of the art world, or the students of art in this place or in that place, they cannot do that. So there is this kind of cultural tourism going on to go to these biennales. Aside from the positive aspect of the biennalization of the world, which is very important, and which I also recognize, which is that you have a decentralization of art, and you have these platforms. I mean, the Gwangju Biennale is seen by so many people from Korea. Really, it's amazing how many people go. And it provides not only a platform for art there without having to feel that you miss going to New York or London or someplace, but also it provides a shift in the attention of the curatorial practice, because you will have more Turkish artists in Istanbul Biennale than you will have in Venice Biennale. And so it or in Gwangju, you'll have a large number of Asian artists in it, always. Whether it's a Korean curator or a non-Korean curator, there'll be a kind of interest in what's going on in that place. So it does contribute to rewriting multiplicity of art histories or other stories of art of the different decades by providing more access to exhibitions on the part of artists from these places. But aside from these two positive aspects, it has this other very unfair and unjust aspect, which is the way that in an ideal universe, the art world is expecting everybody to travel around the world and to compare last Sao Paulo with this year's this and that year's that and that. And it is terribly painful for those who cannot do that. So I wanted to make it impossible for, you know, Larry Gagosian to see half of the dOCUMENTA. I mean, so you couldn't go to Kabul even if you had the money, even if you had a private airplane, even if you were Pinot, you know, with private airplane, you own an auction house. You couldn't go to Kabul to see it for two reasons. One is because you were afraid. You think something bad will happen and I'm not going to do this for art, you know, I get shot for art or something. So fear inhibited a lot of people. And so it wasn't, oh, let's go party in Istanbul. It was, let's not go to Istanbul this year. In fact, there was very few foreigners in Istanbul this year. I was there because I'm part of the Istanbul Biennale group of people, but there was no, you know, nobody from the US went to Istanbul this year, so, because there was the demonstrations and so on. So fear is one thing that would keep people away. But the second is that you couldn't get a visa. Tourist visas are not offered by the, I mean, now they are. Actually, could be an effect of dOCUMENTA, I must say. But it could also be an effect of many other policies, you know, going towards trying to withdraw from the troops and so on from Afghanistan. I'm not sure what the reasons are for this, but very recently they reintroduced the possibility for a tourist visa. So there were no tourist visas available. You had to either work for an NGO or for an embassy or something to go. So therefore the artists all got the visa, the foreign artists who were going to work on the seminars, workshops, or exhibiting or making work there, could get the visa because they were going through the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs that applied on their behalf. So it would be like working for the Goethe in Kabul. But the visitors, the non-implicated visitors, the actual visitor, only visitor, who is not from Kabul, not from Afghanistan, except if you were diaspora, because there is a law whereby anybody who is of Afghan descent can get a visa. So if you were in Los Angeles, Afghan, you could go. So this, in my view, redressed this kind of economic disparity in the ability to go to Gwangju. I mean, the Koreans who cannot go to Kassel, but the Kassel audience cannot go to Kabul. So it kind of made it balanced, and it had something to do with this. If some people are experiencing partialities in their mobility, everybody can experience partiality in their mobility. So that was the reason why it was important for people in Kabul to know that they are missing something. And it was told, but it was not told in a violent way. What we did in Kassel, which I think is important, is we took over a building which behind the Friedrichianum became the building for the school, representing the workshops in Kabul. So I'm going to look for that if I can find it. No, oh, no, laptop. I'm going to go to this for a minute and then tell you the two. I keep not going to the two stories I wanted to tell you. But sure, but many questions.
That sort of decision about who can access which bit of it. I just wondered with the Tas Tadine how the access was for people walking past the chalk drawings. And
you had to leave your backpack at the entrance.
Okay.
And there was guards, they weren't called guards, they were called whatever they are, attendants, who were telling people to be careful.
Okay.
So it was telling people to be careful. Please be careful, please be careful, please be careful.
And
please be careful.
Did the drawings get altered? Were there
were a
people
few
touching?
instances of rubbing off, and that's it. And that's not very little. I think there was a lot of care. Actually, care, as you can tell from the Bactrian princess is a topic, but it's not just a topic. I mean, for me, care was what happens when you take care of these parts. Can the sculpture stay together for thousands of years? What is it to take care? What is it to be careful? To take care. So that's why this is another picture of.
Caroline,
by the way,
can I?
Yes.
Sorry, can I add something
Yes,
in
of
terms
course.
of care? I was just thinking, because I find it kind of physically painful to have this partiality. To a certain extent, I go to an exhibition and I don't understand. It makes me angry. It makes me I feel frustrated. Go through a whole range of affect and emotions. And I was just wondering something I think I learned actually here, but in this art context, is to take care to a certain extent of the larger work, right? Because I come from literature, so a kind of slightly different discipline, and of course you have to approach a text also in a very careful, very slow way sometimes, which is not so much done these days. We want the abstract, we want the condensed way, and I think a way that you present there with the dOCUMENTA is actually the kind of the political resistant way to this rushed way of life, is exactly to be careful, to be to take care of something that takes time. You can't rush art. And in Toy Story, there's this line which I really love, and I feel as a visitor to actually have learned to be more careful with a work of art that is more than just what I see there. I mean, all the kind of the invisible,
but
the procedural.
Yes, but the
all
attempt was not to make you feel frustrated. The attempt was to encourage that by reflecting on this question of the part of the exhibition that you don't see, the part that you can see, to reflect on these partialities and to take care of the fact that our life, that you can't have 150,000 things. It's a sort of anti-consumer culture exhibition. But what I wanted to show you with this was what we did in Kassel. In Kassel there was a building that we took over for the workshops of the Kabul students. So this is the work of Zainab Haidari. So I dedicated a whole building to the Afghan seminars. It was clearly stated that it was dedicated to the Afghan seminars. And in it were both artworks made by artists who would normally have never been invited to the dOCUMENTA. I mean, Zainab Haidari is a student at art school. She's 21. You know, she not. But in this, so I didn't want to like throw demagogically some of the students, pick them and throw them into this dOCUMENTA, and they have to, quote unquote, compete with Tastadin. But I wanted to create a space that would represent the existence of the workshops in Kabul. So Zainab, so what we did was we transcribed, in this vitrine are all the workshops. The workshop that Christophe Menke did on aesthetics, the workshop that Goshka Machuga did, the workshop that I did. Actually, I did a whole one on Abi Warburg and things. It was quite interesting, the subjects, because they didn't want to read Edward Said, you know. They wanted to understand. They wanted to understand the difference between Abi Warburg and Arnold Hauser, you know, and said, okay, so let's do that. So I went back and studied and did it, you know. And so there was all these different workshops and seminars going on, and people coming and going over. What? And we here, you see here, these books are simply the verbal transcription of all the seminars that were done with a translator. So we have them recorded all like we're recording here. So they were in 2 languages. Actually, they were not in 3. They were in 2. You know, there was the choice of Pashto and Dari, and that was a big question, what to do, Pashto or Dari, and then so they're the transcriptions. And this particular wall, as you can see, this was painted by Zainab Haidari. In this space used to be a restaurant, a kind of old German-style restaurant. She painted all these incredibly bright flowers in yellow and blue and all these colors. And then one day she decided, just before the opening of dOCUMENTA in Kassel, to paint over them. So there, and she just left some small parts where you could see that underneath there was these landscapes and colored things. So don't know exactly what it means, but we talked about it. She felt that she was performing the good girl, the good artist, by having painted all these frescoes, and that she was, you know, supposed to be representing her country or something, like in the Venice Biennale. And she decided that she wanted to speak more about this invisibility, you might say, or that's nothing to do with it. And so she... Oh, okay, so
not for the cover person, no, we're working on the technical side now. It's the card that has to have a break. We're respecting the the limits of recordability.
Yes, so good, then we'll go back, we'll do the break, and we're getting there, you know. I mean, we're getting to the Mario Garcia Torres and Mike Rakovitz stories, but we've gone through circuitous ways that propose some context to them as well. Okay.